if you go out in the sun and you haven't eaten chlorophyll, what happens is you will see more rapid aging and you will not produce additional energy. But if you have chlorophyll and you're exposed to the sun, you get both of those benefits. It prolongs your life and it helps you to produce more energy.
Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted more energy and to truly harness the power of the sun, then do we have the Regenerate show for you. Today I'll be talking with Sergey, the founder of GreenMedInfo.com, about his fascinating new book, Regenerate. We'll talk about how the body harvests nature's alternative energy sources to power cellular pathways, build resilience, and promote our evolutionary edge. Plus we'll talk about the power of geckos, easy water, naked apes, octopus ink, photoheterotrophs, and pigs. Who wrote this thing? Me, of course. 10,000 miles and an albatross. And what in the world walking on water and Jesus lizards has to do with anything. So welcome to the show, Sarah. Are you ready to shine?
Wow. I am excited. Thank you. Yeah, this sounds more exciting than I even realized was in the book. So I'm ready.
We are going to have some fun, so mighty. Woohoo! So before we dive right into things, what in the world is paleo-deficit disorder?
Well, it's a term that's generally described for the lack of things that we all participated in our diets, in our lifestyle before the advent of the Industrial Revolution, which about 1860 when around the world, all this mechanization came into play and life changed dramatically. And so paleo-deficit disorder describes how we need certain contact with nature, certain natural foods and practices to be healthy.
Very, very good. And so we're going to talk today about sunlight, melanin, water, chlorophyll. Are these all alternative forces? Geez, my tongue has got my cat today. The alternative sources of energy.
Yes, and that's such an interesting question because in biology, that's pretty fundamental. How does the cell, how do our bodies get energy? And often we're told about things like ATP, these little billiard balls sort of like knocking around inside the cells as, providing that answer. We get our energy from the food we eat is what we're told. And it makes sense. You burn something in a furnace and it gives off heat. That's a calorie of energy. And that's what we think we're basically powered by. But what has happened in the past 20 years is a revolution in biology as described by the literature that now shows that we actually can extract energy from the sunlight, but through intermediaries in our diet like chlorophyll. And that's one of the more exciting discoveries of our time.
Very, very cool. And I want to get to sunlight in a minute. I was telling you off air that I'm a gazer. I don't recommend it for anyone, but I sit with the sun at sunrise and sunset. And I swear the best way to describe it, and I know after my second NDE experience, I used it for healing. I swear I'm getting what I call vitamins in by having my glasses off so that I am fully exposed just above the horizon, just before it goes below the horizon, to amazing rays from the sun.
Exactly. There's a term in, the scientific literature today called photobiomodulation. And it describes how certain wavelengths of sunlight are extremely therapeutic, or put differently, without them, we fall apart. And that's sort of part of the paleo-deficit disorder concept. So the red wavelengths, which happen dawn and dusk, happen to be as essential for our health as vitamin D, vitamin C. Without those wavelengths, arguably, we can't regulate our circadian rhythm and many things start to fall apart.
When I coach clients, and I used to coach, first it was athletes, then it was students and adults with learning disabilities, back to athletes, and now on to professionals. What I found was across the spectrum, if people weren't able to sleep or popping awake in the middle of the night, I would have them go for walks once or twice a day, specifically sunrise and sunset, to see those wavelengths to resync their circadian rhythm.
That's beautiful. I had a very close friend who actually helped me design GreenMed Info. And he was someone who was raised in a ashram in India. And he said, this is part of ancient Vedic tradition. They would wake in the morning and they would literally sort of drink in the elixir of those red wavelengths. And it was considered to be really a divine connection. And so there's a really interesting background to this science, which is that probably since time began for humans, we've been waking with the sun and going to bed when the sun goes down. And that's sort of what we're realizing is to be healthy today, we need to try to access more of that ancient pattern.
Thank you. So let's go from there. We're going to jump back into the sun in a bit. Let's talk about the role that water plays, particularly in energy generation. But before we do that, I want to talk about some weird stuff with water. Jesus lizards.
Yes, they're fascinating. There's a species of lizard known as the Jesus lizard that literally runs across the water. And it's a phenomenon that Jerry Pollack, who is behind the book, The Fourth Phase of Waters, helped to explain, which is that water is more than just H2O. In fact, when it's exposed to sunlight, it structures into what actually looks much like a crystal. It's hexagonal in configuration, and it contains both energy and information, and it is able to basically provide structure and strength for something like a lizard to run across. So it helps us to understand that water has many properties and that our bodies actually contain this type of water, which is more like a gel or a crystal.
And I love that you say information, because I think of it, we've had a guest on several times. We're going to have him back on a book on the Akashic field, Dr. Ervin Laszlo. He's a 2-time nominated Nobel Peace Prize nominee. And he talks about this field, this informed field of quanta, of energy. And that's what you're talking about with water, isn't it? That water is, it's a lot more than fluid going on.
Absolutely. In fact, from the perspective of just the building blocks of the human body, 99% of the molecules in our body by number are actually water, and yet not the kind of water that comes through the tap. It is structured as H3O2 and actually looks very much like a gel or crystal on a microscopic level. And as you mentioned, there is a profound body of research that indicates that water can transduce a huge amount of energy from the quantum vacuum.
Well, it makes me think of what was the term? I'm going to get to it here in a minute. Cytosol. It makes me think of the skin of a cell and just how much energy it can hold and use. We're talking about superconductor beyond superconductor beyond superconductor.
Yes, exactly. It's so fascinating. But some of the new research on the electromagnetic charge of the cytosol shows that there's almost, 15 million volts per meter is the potential energy in the cell. And this is a new finding. They used to think there was no electrical potential. Now they're finding that it has what is equivalent to half a lightning bolt's worth of potential energy. And that's what I mean by the water is potentially able to transduce from the quantum vacuum, which has a near infinite amount of energy within it.
See, and that makes sense to me, because when we look at energy, first off, it isn't what it seems to be. If we can crack one atom and have the atom bomb, and we wonder what's holding that together, then we realize in space, there is so much energy, which means each of us who goes, I'm not having that good of a life, I'm struggling, I'm this, I'm that. Do you realize you have the power of the entire universe in your body?
It's a great example because, there are different types of energy that can be accessed on the physical plane. And, fission using, nuclear fission is one way to create vast explosions, but there's something called water cavitation, which is so interesting. Yes. If you're in a boat and the propeller, is spinning, it produces these little steam bubbles, and they actually implode upon themselves and produce what's known as a reentrant jet that has been shown to produce temperatures that are about the same as on the surface of the sun. And so that type of energy is coming from within the quantum vacuum, it's different from fission, right? It's like an explosion, but with cavitation, it's more of an implosive type of energy generation. And that's what our body is comprised of. In fact, I looked at this research and found recently that our own voice goes to ultrasound frequencies, and ultrasound is what you can use to induce water cavitation events, which then create these little micro, if you will, supernovas. So technically, we do have access to that type of energy. And one quick example is the mantis shrimp. There are these little creatures. There's actually a pistol shrimp and a mantis shrimp. And when they strike their claws, they produce cavitation water bubble, which produces heat that is about the same as on the surface of the sun. And that's how they kill their prey. They can break through aquarium glass. They can split a diver's thumb. And so that is an example of a biological system producing energy from transducing the quantum vacuum.
That makes me also think of things like sound healing therapy. I'm looking at a Tibetan singing bowl. I'm thinking of the frequency of Om and how that can travel into the body, 99% water, as you're saying, and change everything.
Yeah, so that's the beauty of the new biology, is once we acknowledge that the vast majority of research performed on living things has been on desiccated biopolymers, if you will, where they're killing the object of study to understand their structure, but you lose the function and the life, which is primarily based on water. So the new biology looks at life through a different lens, and in fact, sound waves and the cymoscope specifically is one way you can respect the integrity of life. You don't kill it and understand it in a different way.
It's interesting. My wife had almost a decade ago, we were in Thailand. She was struggling with her health. We didn't know she had mold toxicity poisoning at the time. And she met with a doctor who'd worked with the Dalai Lama, and he had a sound frequency device. And you could use this device. I wish I knew what it was called. And you basically, I think it pinged like sonar. You could talk with each specific part of the body, which had a resonance, which had a frequency. Yes. And you could learn from that frequency, what's your kidney doing, what's your liver doing, what's your skin doing, which is the largest organ. And you could communicate through frequency with the body.
Exactly. In fact, I work with a researcher who invented the cymoscope, which turns sound into visible imagery. They look like little mandalas, actually. Cool. And what they do is they'll do an experiment where they take yeast and, they'll use the sound frequencies, and then they'll add, let's say, some sugar. And they start like singing like, this wild sound of ecstasy because they're being fed, and they change the structure immediately. So it's a different way of understanding living things by understanding that they're also sound.
I love that. I used to, when my wife and I lived on Maui, we would, we played with kombucha, and we had all of these scobies, and we made cultured nut butter and cultured coconut kefir. And when you would add the sugar to the living creatures basically in the kefir, it would just light up almost like a song. It would just and literally foam up, which we don't necessarily have to go there today, speaks specifically to why there's sugar and other things that you really don't want to put much in your body because of what's going on in the microbiome, and then the feedback mechanism of them saying, give us more.
Exactly. Yeah. Sugar is a double-edged sword. It's such an ecstatically beautiful substance, but it can feed, the overgrowth of candida and other things we don't want.
Tell us, what is easy water?
So easy water is based on the discovery in Jerry Pollack's lab. He had a student walk by their water experiment with a flashlight, and they noticed that the surface of the water that was next to the what's called hydrophilic or water-loving surface of a Naflon tube, it's plastic basically, started to structure out in a very interesting way. It started to get crystal-like, and it was starting to exclude all the solutes, which are dissolved, minerals, etc. And so that was the discovery that water structures in basically living things, because although it was a plastic-based experiment, when you look at our blood vessels, for example, they're lined with this easy water, this structured water. And what Jerry Pollack found is that when you, again, add light, could be sunlight or flashlight, it starts to power up that biomolecule, and you start to see the flow of the blood. So technically, it's the ambient energy in the environment that is causing all the blood in our body to go race through the 100,000 miles of blood vessels that the body contains. The old view that the body, blood is a pump-based system has now been eclipsed by looking at actually easy water generating most of the energy to move the blood in the body. So when we're drinking structured water, let's say it's Mountain Valley in glass, we put it out in the sun, it gets really structured. That's very biocompatible and very healing for our body. But if we're drinking municipal tap, it's not structured. We have to take life energy to restructure it just so that it can be part of our body.
Is there a protocol you'd recommend, or what we can do simply, particularly during this time where economically buying expensive stuff is probably not in the cards for many people, to structure our water? Absolutely.
So reverse osmosis is one of the more cost-effective ways to take your municipal water from your tap, and then it's a 2-micron, a pour that you push it through, and it excludes all the crap that's in that water. Then you have this pretty much distilled type water. It's maybe 2 parts per million or less of dissolved solid versus maybe 500 for municipal. So the gunk is out, but then you want to put structure into it. So what you do is you add a little sea salt, you add a little lemon, maybe some flower remedies, and if you get really creative, you can go put it in glass and put it in the sun, and that water will have a lot of structure, and you'll feel it. It'll be very different. You could even vortex the water. There's a lot of machines that will do this now too to add structure, but it is qualitatively completely different. It's so much more healing.
We have labels on our jars that we have water. Things will say healing power, it will say love, it will say energizing, and we're thinking of Dr. Emoto's experiments with water, and that we are actually entraining the water. I want you to go to the frequency of healing, for instance.
Yes. Well, it's a beautiful thing, that you could intend for something to have this vibration and that it would transfer. In fact, Luc Montagnier, now Nobel Prize winner for discovering HIV, he did an experiment that showed that you can basically transport from a test tube the structure of DNA to another test tube that has all these chopped up pieces of nucleic acid by sending an electromagnetic wave through. That, our thoughts are electromagnetic waves. We are water. So if there's a vial of water here and we're water sending the wave over there, it could theoretically provide a template for that biomolecule to assemble as we desire. So this is no longer pseudoscience, or magical thinking. This is Nobel Prize winners have now done studies published in Nature on the topic.
This makes me think we get to even be more careful about what we watch for what I call negative, worthless stimulation news, because you can get a transference of energy of what you're reading and watching.
I thank you for that. Yes, because I've come to understand that it's not so much the violence on TV, it's the violence of the TV, and that it is an electromagnetic waveform, if you will, that a lot of it is programmed to incite fear and uncertainty, especially now. So I agree. I try not to watch conventional news. And, like you said, you're out there meditating and you have your squirrels next to you now. I mean, they know more what's going on than CNN and Fox, in my opinion.
And they're more connected. In fact, let's go from the chipmunks, the squirrels. Let's talk about plant intelligence. In fact, we had a guest on a few years ago about the secret language of trees. Are plants intelligent?
Yeah, in fact, they're so fascinating because they're able to do this thing called quantum processing. So the whole basis for them being able to produce energy is through these light harvesting complexes. And they've found that the only way that they can explain the efficiency of these plants in taking light energy and turning it, splitting water, turning it into photosynthesis is through it, in a way, computing infinite number of variables, and then deciding in a way that translates into something good for it. And so that's just talking about the intelligence of plants, but it's also now known that they remember, they communicate to each other. And that's a big focus of my work with Regenerate is to help people understand that there's information transfer between plants through these little nanoparticles called exosomes, and that when we eat the plants, that information transfers and helps heal our body. So there's communication going all over the place all the time between plants and animals and between animals and plants.
It sounds like it's even more important to find plants, happy plants that you're going to eat rather than miserable ones.
Absolutely. It's true. And for a number of reasons. One, too, is the microbiome. Unfortunately, with conventionally farmed plants, the microbiome of these plants is a lot of it's factory farmed animal waste and other stuff that you just don't want to put in your body. So happy grown plants are definitely going to make you happier. It's just true.
When I go out in the woods, I think of Peter Wohleben's book. This was on forests communicating or trees communicating. And I look at particularly springtime or fall, there are trees that will decide to grow fast early. There are trees that will hold on to their leaves longer. And there are trees that have lots of wisdom and decide, no, I want to get rid of the leaves earlier. And so they're calculating, they're making decisions, and then they're even teaching their young, here's what we recommend that you do. I think it's why old forest, old growth is so important, because of the intelligence that they keep within them.
That's so profound. And I think we're coming to understand, too, in this moment, that's true for our elders, and how, unfortunately, many of the wise members of our society, we've sent away to homes, and we've just sort of lost contact with that commitment to community and family. And it's true for us, too. We need that as well.
So thank you. Let's go from here to the word that I was stumbling over at the beginning. I was like, who wrote this thing? Photoheterotrophs. And what does it have to do with pigs?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, it's an amazing thing that recently there was a study that was published. I believe it was the Journal of Cell Science in 2016, and it showed finally that when an animal, like a pig, it could be an earthworm, a human, consumes chlorophyll, it's broken down into a metabolite called PBE, and that's taken into the mitochondria. And now the mitochondria of mammals, which are not supposed to take energy from the sun directly, actually harvest the photonic energy, and then that helps it produce more ATP more efficiently. And so essentially, the discovery now confounds the traditional classification of autotrophs as plants that just sit there and take energy from the environment versus the heterotroph, which is always out there scrounging away trying to eat something because it doesn't have its own energy source from the sun. We're actually photoheterotrophic now. We're in between. And it has a profound number of implications, because if you go out in the sun and you haven't eaten chlorophyll, what happens is you will see more rapid aging and you will not produce additional energy. But if you have chlorophyll and you're exposed to the sun, you get both of those benefits. It prolongs your life and it helps you to produce more energy.
It might explain one of the weird quirks that I have as kind of a Wim Hof tendency. Well before Wim Hof was Wim Hof, the Iceman, is that I'll go out in the middle of the winter here in Colorado, and I'll just have my running shorts on and my shoes, and that's about it. And I'm running, soaking in as much of the sun as I can, and I finish, and it's not just from the cold, but I feel more energized from soaking in that sun.
Yes. Well, exactly, because it's an interesting thing if you think about how the oil companies have convinced, humankind that, we can't get energy from this limitless source of energy, right? And now that's changing. People know more about solar. But so chlorophyll functions very similar to a solar panel for the human body. And it's true that when we go outside and we experience light in this way, you also start realizing that you don't actually need to eat as much as we once believed. It's not to say eating isn't ecstatic and beautiful. It is, but it's not as necessary in the quantities that we've been consuming, because we can get energy directly from the environment.
It makes me think of, I've got two things. One, the albatross, but also the hummingbird, which has the fastest metabolism on the planet. We feed about 1,000 hummingbirds here. We have 10 or 11 hummingbird feeders at once with 10 ports on each. And sunset, when they get their last feeding,
so beautiful.
Particularly right before September, beginning of September, end of September, a hummingbird, smallest mammal, fastest mammal per size, is going to fly 2,000 miles without eating.
That's amazing. Wow. Well, this is exactly the point with the albatross. This is the one animal, right, that flies that we know of that can navigate the entire globe. And how does it do that? Because there's absolutely no way in flying without stopping for food that it could do that if we just looked at conventional, cellular bioenergetics. And so what they discovered is behind the eyes, it has a highly melanized organ called the pecten, P-E-C-T-E-N, and it's harvesting sunlight. And that also explains a lot about why melanin is such a powerful biomolecule in energy intensive organs. And so this is one of those really fascinating topics like chlorophyll.
So this is going to make me bring a tie in here, and I want to see how you roll with this. What does the pineal gland have to do with all of this?
Wow. Well, that's a really good question. I know that it is sometimes believed to be the seat of the soul, and it has a very interesting number of functions. But one thing we do know about it is that it's very susceptible to calcification when exposed to fluoride and other modern chemicals. As far as the pineal gland and then melanin content, that's a really good question. It's light sensitive. So it's actually, it's a neuroendocrine organ. So it actually literally has an eye-like function. It's sensitive to the light. And that's why, it's sometimes called the third eye. But it's one of the amazing things about neuroanatomy and mysticism and the new biology is we're starting to have a sense of just that this is more than just a carcass, and that these amazing organs have potential powers that we can access as we better understand ourselves.
Very cool. So let's dive more into melanin and about this conversion of light to metabolic energy. Yeah. Since we're doing that, why don't we start with Caucasians and how Caucasians may have ended up being so white?
That's a great question. So one of the ideas that seems to have taken hold in evolutionary biology and anthropology, etc., is that we seem to have all originated from Africa 60,000 years ago, because you can go track through the mitochondrial DNA a single origin point in a theoretical woman back there that we all came from. And so if that's true, it's probably likely that both Caucasian and even Asian lineages, through migrating northward out of pressure, we don't know what called them or forced them to go north, they ended up in regions where in the northern latitudes where there just wasn't enough sun. And so during the year, so they couldn't harvest the energy using melanin in the way that you would if you were at the equator or near it. And so they lost that ability, but in exchange, they also benefited in other ways. So there was a profound shift that occurred. But okay, the point is that in going back through this perspective, melanin may have been essential for us to survive in ancient times because it helped us to harvest sunlight. And when you're dealing in times of famine, that little difference could be the reason why we're all here today, because our ancestors would have died without access to that energy source. So melanin, by the way, is very powerful because it has been found through a Mexican researcher, Arturo Herrera, to disassociate the water molecule, which is a way of freeing up high energy electrons, which are then used for energy, as well as molecular hydrogen and oxygen. And what that does essentially is, in places like the substantia nigra in the brain, it degenerates in Parkinson's disease. We all know that. The theory is that, we don't produce enough dopamine, and that's why people start having the symptoms. However, the alternative explanation is that it is actually a power generating center in the brain and any organ where in which melanin is found in high concentrations. And so it's actually, melanin has a broad range of functions. It chelates heavy metals, for example. And so over time, the more toxicants we're exposed to, the more melanized tissue degenerates. So the cause of Parkinson's may actually be environmental, and the downstream effect is lower energy production in the brain and lower oxygen, because dissociation of the water molecule produces oxygen for the cells as well as energy. So melanin is really a master energy producing molecule in the body.
So if I was to really extrapolate almost to the end of the earth here, what I could say is that some of these conditions this is theoretical at this point, may actually be improved, but my gut would tell me absolutely, by spending more, rather than demonizing it, less, more time in the sun.
Yes, with the caveat that for those who have lighter skin, they would want to, be more careful around the solar noon period where there's more UVB that's on 2 hours either side of solar noon. And that is actually great for producing vitamin D, but it can also create a lot of phototoxicity. So with your Caucasian, you need to consume more chlorophyll. Mm-hmm. You need to make sure you have more antioxidants, essential fatty acids, and you could consider consuming biomelanin, which comes in the pigments we find in black foods, but some of the best sources are chaga mushroom. So that's another way that you could supplement to protect yourself.
I've got to go back. I just had an interview on, last week with Dr. Norman Shealy, father of holistic medicine, and he was talking about a supplement that you can take. I believe it was plant-based, that you would never burn even as Caucasian, and it was something I hadn't heard of before, and I needed to flip through and listen to what that is.
Yeah, I would love to know what that is. But on the other side of it, theoretically, if you have lighter skin, you're going to be able to produce more vitamin D quicker. So it is a balance. You don't need maybe as much sunlight exposure. If you were, like, say, African American, you need more. So everything has its benefit and downside.
So and let's talk about some of those benefits of getting more vitamin D in you.
Well, the beauty of vitamin D produced in the body through sunlight exposure, we can thank Stephanie Seneff for a lot of this research, is that you end up with a sulfated form. And sulfate deficiency and sulfur deficiency is a big issue in Western cultures. And what this does is enable you to fight infection off better and also ramp up your transsulfuration pathways, which help you to detoxify fat-soluble, or what are known as lipophilic chemicals. That could be pesticides that go deep into fruits and then they accumulate in your body forever. So technically, sunlight exposure does provide really good forms of vitamin D. But what I like to tell people is it's almost like looking at a beautiful orange and thinking you can get just the benefit of vitamin C from it, and it's replaced. So vitamin D is a small but important part of the benefits you get from full sunlight exposure, as you know better than anyone, because you're regularly getting red wavelengths, which if you can't go outside and get the red, then make sure you wear your glasses at night to block your blue.
Very nice.
And yes, I love that. And then I read at night, so I have a special, orange light bulb, and it's amazing. You can read at night, you start to get tired naturally. Blue is so stimulating and toxic, so it's important we be aware of that.
I have a BenQ monitor here, which naturally, by design, filters out blue light. I then use something at night and in the morning called Just Get Flux, which is a free downloadable app to take out even more of that blue light. And then I teach people automatic writing, a process of kind of channeled writing first thing in the morning. I put on my computer what I call darkroom mode. It only emits red light from your monitor.
Wow.
Because you start to realize just how much that blue light, when it's not daylight hours, hurts.
It's amazing. I didn't realize how damaging blue light was until I started looking at Dr. Jack Kruse's work. He's amazing, gets into quantum biology. And I went on PubMed. I'm like, okay, he says it's bad, so let me look what the research says. And it's amazing. I mean, it's literally diabetogenic. It'll raise your blood levels, blood sugar levels, and cause insulin resistance, and has all these other adverse effects. So it's not to say that we're all going to die if we're exposed to it, but especially at night, you want to just shut down your blue light. You'll see a complete difference in how you feel.
Thank you. So are there any, before we dive into fungi, and I'm really excited for this, anything else having to do with sunlight, things of this sort that we should be aware of or take action on?
Yeah, I just believe that the best thing you could do, and I know you're a huge advocate and expert on this, is grounding your feet barefoot to the ground breathing the air and getting sunlight exposure at least daily. I mean, once a day. I know it's a tall order and ask for some people who are in cities or, their lives are very complicated, but it is probably one of the most regenerative things that we can do for our bodies.
Certainly. And from a grounding perspective, I've got my grounding mat here. I'll put a grounding link for everybody. I'm trying to plug into the earth in every
wonderful.
way I can all the time. So you'll see little pads around where I'm plugging in, because the getting the free electrons of the earth is so huge. And we forget about this, that we were always meant to be out there.
So true. And as you know better than anyone, barefoot. And that's what gives us that limitless stream of negative ions so that we can, neutralize free radical processes that are constantly happening in our body, as well as just getting a real deep, anti-inflammatory effect. We can pop turmeric all day and do all these supplements, but really the reality is we're going to get a connection to earth that has more than just a biophysical benefit. It's a spiritual connection that is so important for us to feel safe and whole inside.
Thank you. So speaking of safe and whole, let's go to fungi and Chernobyl.
Well, Chernobyl was obviously one of the most horrific nuclear meltdowns that has ever happened. And what they found while it was still steaming, the ruins, was that the inside of the reactor was coated with this highly melanized fungi, black. And it was sitting there literally thriving off of what for most animals would cause death rather rapidly. And so that was one of the examples of how biomelanin, that black stuff that again is found in all our organs, is essential for transforming what are otherwise deadly electromagnetic waves like gamma radiation into what can be beneficial to life.
So I remember when we lived on Maui, it was right after Fukushima. And people were really, really concerned. Don't eat anything out of the water. What does this mean for us? And then there was another competing camp that said, eat your seaweed and eat your fungi, even if it comes from Asia, that it is actually going to help pull it out of your bloodstream and get it out of the body.
This is such a profound topic because after Fukushima, I also went down the rabbit hole months. I went on Medline and found any study I could find on both the harm and how to reduce it. And I found some amazing stuff. After Chernobyl, apopectin was actually used to save the lives of tens of thousands of children because it literally pulls out these low-dose nucleotides that get in radionuclides. And I also found that our own microbiome has the ability to transmute these highly toxic isotopes into less toxic or entirely non-toxic isotopes. Japanese researchers, Russian researchers have discovered this.
Very, very cool. And it means that I want to go back to almost the premise that we were saying in the beginning. I'm picturing the mirror on the side of the car. Objects are not what they appear to be. In traditional, conventional medicine, you get a dose, you're done. That's it. It just accumulates in the body. But there is an intelligence to plants. There's an intelligence to fungi, which are their own category on their themselves. There's an intelligence to all of this.
Yes.
Which says we are in a lot more control of our bodies than we ever thought we were. A lot more resilient.
Thank you. Yes. So I'm a good example of someone from early on, from infanthood onward. I've been pretty wrecked physically, and so it took me a long time to start to have some kind of real hope about what our body's capable of doing vis-a-vis these horrific realities. And I started to plumb the depths of the research, and I couldn't believe my eyes that, yes, our body is so resilient that we can literally handle things like plutonium. In fact, my wife, Kelly Brogan, she pulled an assay out once, an assay of Himalayan sea salt, and I was shocked because it has naturally occurring plutonium. Plutonium, even one little atom, is like a howitzer in your cells and theoretically will create havoc and death and destruction forever after, and it can't be pulled out very easily. But when I started to realize that our bodies were built with mechanisms to actually decontaminate radioactive materials, that's when I was like, wow, thank God, like this information's here now, because I don't want to live in a world where we're all going to die slowly from the increasing distribution of these radioactive materials that are now really everywhere thanks to these fallouts and these weapons tests.
Yeah, and then to take it on a slightly different note, going back to light, if you take that Himalayan sea salt, and I'm concerned, I don't know what the truth is about how much they've mined out and what that's doing to the earth, but a Himalayan sea salt lamp, when you talk about light that feels good to your eyes at night,
yes.
No coincidence, is it?
That's a really good point. Yeah, no. And I love the Himalayan sea salt lamps for that reason, because it just has such a good vibe in terms of how it helps our body feel.
Very good. So let's go from there. We're going to talk a little bit more about circadian rhythm plugging into the earth. Well, actually, first, before we do that, what should we take? What do you recommend we take as far as mushrooms and fungi here?
Okay, so my favorite mushroom when it comes to radio toxicity is chaga mushroom, because amazing research was done on giving animals chaga versus just a lethal dose of radiation. The chaga mushroom group survived without seeming any indication that they were given that lethal dose. So that was one of the studies that really opened my eyes. And so for me, that's one thing that I take when I feel like, okay, I want to address this concern. But that said, the microbiome innately has the ability to decontaminate these elements, and that includes petrochemicals that are highly toxic. And so our genes don't have the enzymes to do that, but that's why the microbiome is practically miraculous in the way it extends our genetic capabilities. So in other words, make it simple. Eat locally from organic sources where the microbiome's intact. Make sure you're consuming fermented food as well, and have confidence that your body is resilient and will handle it.
Means we get to take care of. So I'm going to bring it back to water. I was going to say take care of our microbiome well, but I think of our microbiome of a funny way of looking at it. If you watch the movie Men in Black, there was the cat. They're talking about the galaxy is on Orion's belt, and it turns out that the cat in this movie has on a little marble in a necklace that has a galaxy inside of it. An entire galaxy in a marble, because we are infinite in all directions. Space is infinite, inward and outward, small and large. And yes. I look at the microbiome as a whole galaxy or universe to itself, and it is based in water. So how we treat ourselves, I love you. I bless you, microbiome. I bless you, body. Literally, how you speak to yourself affects and infects an entire universe within you.
Yeah, that is powerful and true. It's a vibration, and we know that our voice carries these powerful waves. So even just scientifically, it's so true what you're saying. They will literally structure water-based life in specific ways, these wavelengths. So it's very true what you're saying.
Excellent. So let's go from there. Another big term that sounds kind of fun, suprachiasmatic nucleus, talking about the human clock.
Yes. I mean, there are the center in our brain that basically acts like a clock that's connected to the rhythms of the earth as well as the entire universe. But without the proper synchronization with light cycles, it completely can fall apart, and it will not so much, activate disease genes in our body. Rather, it's going to cause you to adapt to this unnatural environment to try to, get you through it. So, my view is disease is an attempt to heal or an adaptation. It's not intrinsically a bad thing, right? Yeah. And I know you get that, because the allopathic model is, you have a disease, it's bad, let's suppress it, cut it out. Sorry, nothing you can do about it. Whereas we know that ultimately our body's infinitely intelligent. So needless to say, that very big word is a reminder to us that our brain depends on natural light and connection with these natural cycles. So the medicine is there, but it does require us generating a certain lifestyle around the natural elements.
Thank you. I'm going to go completely off topic and on. You mentioned body's infinite intelligence. You mentioned dis-ease is actually a system that goes out of whack, but had a good intention in the beginning. I think of quote unquote autoimmune disorders as having a good intention, a good reason for it. In the beginning, it's sort of like alcoholism. And for some people, the alcohol was actually an important medicinal in the beginning, and then it went out of order. So going to autoimmune disorders, bringing it to light, I'm thinking of my sister who has lupus, who it flares up if she goes in sunlight. How do we get with autoimmune our body back into its infinite intelligence, back into balance?
That's a great question. So what I've looked at with that topic on GreenMed Info, one of the largest of all the topics into the disease category, which there's 3,000, is autoimmune diseases. And the attempt was to accumulate as much research to see which substance is most therapeutic, broad spectrum, for any autoimmune disease. And it turns out that beta-glucan, interestingly, is a polysaccharide found in things like grains, actually ironically, and it has a seeming immunomodulatory property for either Th1 or Th2 dominant conditions. So on either side, it seems to cause a balancing effect, and very clinically validated at this point too. That's a general recommendation, but I would say that there are spiritual reasons, obviously, why the blowback can happen. I'm a big advocate of narrative medicine, which really tries to find the emotional substrate and spiritual substrate for why we're diseased, but I will say that it can get bypassy if we go to too great of an extreme. Sometimes someone just has chemicals or intolerances that they need to address. So there is a really just specifically physical layer. And then there's even the auto-diagnosis problem, because unfortunately, we know now through the new biology that there are natural auto-antibodies. There's a baseline, actually, and that what we formerly believed to be strictly a pathological process, we now understand adds a whole layer of really recombinatorial gene expression to our genome. So technically, what we thought autoantibodies were a decade ago is now shifting. So some of these processes are pathologized and actually are part of a healing crisis. If they are led to go forward, they would resolve. So that's also another perspective.
Well, you went in about a dozen different directions. One of them you went in, I first heard it from Dr. Deepak Chopra 20, 30 years ago, the nocebo effect. Be very careful how you label yourself, or you are stuck with your label.
That's such a powerful point. It's actually the basis for the most extensive chapter in my book is on cancer and the role of the nocebo effect, because we know after a very large study on the Swedish population that when someone is getting their result for their cancer test and they're told that they have cancer, irregardless of whether it's an accurate diagnosis or not, their chance of dying from a heart-related death goes up to 26.9-fold for things like brain cancer diagnoses, versus if they were told they don't. So in other words, they have heartbreak and they die. And this is what used to happen in ancient traditions, where a shaman might say to a member of the tribe, you're cursed and you're going to die tomorrow. And that person would believe that's true, and they would go off and they would end up dying. And the present medical system is based on the same type of the belief system, infusing the priest of the body with all the power. And I think we're getting to the point where we're realizing that we're at least co-creating that, and that even better, the inner physician that Hippocrates used to talk about is our primary healer and should be.
Thank you. And you talk a lot in the book about epigenetics. In fact, we had on Dr. Dawson Church years ago. We had Bruce Lipton. We had Dr. Dawson Church, The Genie in Your Genes. And when you're talking about co-creation and nocebo effect, we have the ability. We don't have to, forgive me, my personal belief is often we don't have to remove parts of our bodies to prevent problems. We can flip those genes. We can literally go into our mind and flip those genes on or off.
That's absolutely true, because epigenetics is what is beyond the control of the gene itself, and how what we think, what we do, what we eat is going to modulate gene expression. And so I'm a huge fan of people becoming aware of just really how much power they have, and actually how the conventional protein-based genome that we focus on is actually such a small part of the picture, because technically 98% of the genome has been ignored and called junk for years. Only now, because of amazing people like Jeffrey Bland, are we understanding that that's the dark matter of the human genome, and that it has a lot to do with RNAs, actually, a lot of which we can control the expression of through diet and through thinking and basic lifestyle practices.
Very cool. We had on recently Dr. Dean Radin, head of Center for Noetic Sciences, and he studies psi, parapsychology, which has been studied for over 100 years. And they have 6 Sigma results on so many of these studies on precognition and telepathy and on it goes. And he is studying for his next book. They are looking at people who are generational shamans. People who come from families of shamans and seem to be able to sense things. And what they're finding is they've actually isolated in the genome what you call junk genes that are transferring from one generational shaman to the next, which are help flipping these things on.
That's amazing. Wow. Well, in my book, one of the things I focus on is the fact that the new biology shows that we are Lamarckian creatures. So like if you're a shaman in this lifetime, your child is going to end up getting passed down many of the same types of information that then they would potentially use to practice or experience similar things. And that was based on Darwin's own belief, because he was actually Lamarckian himself. And technically, now that we are in the post-genomic era, anything we feel, think, or exposed to will affect our somatic cells, which then communicate to our germline cells through exosomes. And therefore, anything you do or feel in this moment can theoretically be passed down forever into the next generation. That was not believed in for the majority of the history of molecular biology and genetics, but now it's true. So.
And it probably was for hundreds, if not thousands of years before that, before we forgot. In fact, when I wear a different hat, I call myself an alchemist. I say I like to play with energy. And that's really what we're talking about. In fact, you talk about alchemy, transmutation in the human body. For instance, you don't need to take calcium in to have calcium in your body. There are studies like hens and calcium, aren't there?
It's amazing, actually. When you think about the cow, right, that's sitting there grazing away at, magnesium-rich grass all day and just excreting massive amounts of calcium, that was one example in the natural world of where we seem to be able to see intuitively that, systems like our bodies can transmute elements into one another, say magnesium to calcium, right? And so that is what comes up in the book, because there has been several hundred years of research on this topic that has been suppressed by the conventional scientific establishment, because the implications are just profound. So really quick, like you look at an air plant growing on a copper wire, and how is it manifesting itself? But then people are like, well, you can't create something out of nothing, because it kind of looks like that. But then you think about what most adherents on the planet in cosmology believe in the Big Bang, and that's a really big something coming from a really little nothing. Our bodies are self-manifesting constantly and creating elements, literally transducing energy from the quantum vacuum into programmable matter. And that's something that Jack Kruse has looked at, and many other people that I document in my book.
When I think one of the most tangible experiments, I don't know what we call it for me, examples maybe is a better way, is egg and sperm. And the egg and sperm come together, and how do they have this blueprint? This one cell is going to go up to the head. This is going to be a toenail. This is going to be, a liver. This is going to be a spleen. If they're not plugged into this field of energy, getting the information and then pulling out of the field and assembling.
Absolutely. It's such a beautiful point. You think of embryogenesis, and it's a manifestation out of practically nothing, or 2 cells into a complete human being. And the information for that amazing, miraculous body plan isn't in the genes. For example, earthworms have the same amount of coating protein genes as humans. It's in the field, and you can call it a morphogenic field like Sheldrake, or you can call it the quantum fabric, the ether. But we do know that that is the divine intelligence. It permeates us, it's all around us, and it's not, magical thinking any longer.
So thank you. I want to go from there before we wrap things up with a few last how-tos. I want to talk about a divine intelligence creation machine at the mitochondria. And I have a feeling you are a mitochondrial nut and love this thing. What can you tell me about it?
Well, I am only because as I started to try to find the answer to this age-old question, how does our body produce energy? When I went into the research on the mitochondria, I found this amazing study published by an Army scientist, Goldfine, back in the 70s, was it? Yeah, and he found that the mitochondria literally act like a particle accelerator. In fact, a cyclotron specifically. Yeah, and that means they're taking basically a hydrogen ion, right? And they're accelerating it to near the speed of light and then crashing it into a mineral, which then transmutes it. And so basically it's like a particle accelerator in every cell in our body. And that explains why the inner mitochondrial membrane of every mitochondrion in our body is electric field strength potential of 30 million volts per meter, which is about the same as discharged by a lightning bolt, which indicates again that there is a near infinite amount of energy that our body has access to. And where is it coming from? It's not from our hamburgers, from this quantum vacuum, right? That for the longest time, the particle physicists, all these people in the conventional realms have said, you can't transduce it. It's there theoretically, but you can't do anything with it. You can consult a pistol shrimp and it'll show you when it breaks the aquarium glass that it is able to do it, And so does our human body, in my belief.
Thank you. So what's one thing we can do to take care of our mitochondria?
That's a great question. It's interesting because the actual structured water is lining all of the inner mitochondrial membrane. And it's, again, the magical stuff that has been ignored, from the birth of conventional biology, really. And so I believe that is still number one is proper hydration with the highest quality water we can get. Yep. Yeah. And then, of course, exposure to the sunlight, and then grounding and movement, and then all the things that, we aspire to do, which is to remain kind to ourselves and others. And, it's just very basic, humble spiritual practice.
Very, very cool. So on that note, where can people go to find your amazing book and to find out more?
Thank you. Well, you can go to, any of the places you get books online, Amazon and Barnes and Noble. It is actually an Audible book too. I spent 5 days just putting my heart and soul into it, and I feel really good about that form.
And I'm glad you did it yourself. Yeah. I did an audio book myself. It was a labor of love.
We can empathize with each other. I almost collapsed by the end of it, but it was a beautiful experience. And that's a great way to do it. And then I have a daily newsletter, greenmedinfo.com, and that's how I connect to my people. So it's just great to be on the show, and a great honor to meet you and to have this dialogue.
Sayer, this goes both ways. We're like brothers from another mother. This is awesome.
I agree.
Any last words of wisdom you want to share with people today?
Well, just that we live in trying times. So what I've come to understand is that if I can maintain some equanimity within me, that seems to be the solution for how I maintain health and wellness, because it's, you get stressed. It doesn't matter so much with what you're eating versus what you're feeling these days. So I try to focus on that first, take deep breaths, and then from there we try to help others. So that's kind of what I'm focused on. You have to heal yourself first to be able to help others.
Woohoo! I've got an obsidian stone here, and the secret to this interview is I send love. I send love. And it just puts you in this vibrational state, and from this vibrational state, anything is possible.
That's beautiful. That's great. I had a crystal this whole time, but I wasn't doing that. So next time I'm gonna do that with my pet rock here.
I love it. You've got it going on. So yes. For everyone out there, this has been phenomenal. Woohoo!
Thank you.
For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get regenerate, and begin to plug into the energy of the world naturally from inside of yourself today, and shine bright. Woohoo!
Right, did it.
Thank you so much, Sayer.
Thank you. It was a very nice experience. I really like your energy, of course, and your work. And so, yeah, it's good to know you.
If you're watching this, then you are a light worker. You're a light warrior, and I want to help. We offer everything from boot camps, mini masterclasses, full-on masterminds, and private one-on-one coaching with me. To find out more about our upcoming courses, simply visit InspireNationUniversity.com or click on the links below. And to find out more about coaching, simply visit InspireNationShow.com/coaching. We also have weekly YouTube live events with me where you can ask me your questions live and YouTube premieres featuring me and our guest. Simply subscribe below and click on the bell icon to be notified of upcoming shows. Wow, did I just have the most energizing, informative, boost up your energy, connect to the earth, connect to the sun, connect to your mitochondria interview with Sayerji. To check out more incredible energy boosting interviews, click here. Subscribe below, click on the bell icon to be notified of upcoming shows, YouTube premieres, and live events every Sunday night with me. Be sure to check out our boot camps and mini masterclasses. Click on the link below. Of course, there is coaching with me if you'd like to take your life to a whole new level and find success beyond anything you ever imagined. Then simply reach out to us as well about coaching. You can find out at InspireNationShow.com/coaching. Leave a big thumbs up if you like this. Leave your comments below, and above and beyond all else, shine bright. Woohoo! Love you guys.